Hello, friends. It's Christmas time, and we're excited about that. Let's talk about 7 Christmas traditions and their origins. Christmas is here. We're so excited about it because we love Christmas. But Christmas is interesting and a bit confusing for Christians because all of our Christmas traditions have this interesting history tied to it. And many people are anti-Christmas because they say it's pagan. So hey, let's talk about that. First, we talk about December 25th. That's our first tradition. December 25th being Christmas here in the Northern Hemisphere. We're excited about that. It's tied to snow and wintry days. While our friends in the Southern Hemisphere, they have a completely different experience going to the beach and celebrating with family around a barbecue. So it depends on where you're from and what that looks like for your Christmas tradition. But December 25th has historically been the day that we've celebrated Christmas. But it wasn't always the case. It didn't naturally start out from the very beginning when Jesus was born. In fact, it wasn't until the year 336 when the Roman emperor established that day as Christmas that we started celebrating Christmas on December 25th. Obviously, there was some interesting things around December 25th because why are we celebrating then? Wasn't Jesus born in the springtime? Well, think about it. If you're a Roman emperor and people are already celebrating some things, you don't want to take away their celebration. Instead, you're replacing their celebration with a different celebration on a close day. So many across the Roman Empire, they would already celebrate the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year. And from that day is the day that it starts to grow back in length of the light in the sky, meaning that spring is on its way, and then summer and fall and crops and all those other wonderful things that keep everyone alive in the ancient world. So since that was the fact, it was already a celebration, and that's usually on the 21st or 22nd of December. They went with the 25th of December, tying it closely to that idea. That's where December 25th comes from, and that's the day that we set out and we celebrate the arrival of the Messiah. For us, we hold that day as dear to us because it's a day set aside to celebrate Him. We go on to the next one. And as we talk about some of these things, remember, it's always changed throughout history on how it looks depending on what Christian heritage you are tied to. So, for instance, those who celebrate things like decorating your house for Christmas and things like that, that wasn't a thing that everyone did. In fact, that was a thing that in early America, the Puritans were very much against. Even passing laws in Massachusetts in the 1600s against decorating your house for Christmas. So, we've come a long time since then, and we've had a lot of changes towards the way we feel about Christmas and about all these traditions. The next thing we'll talk about is our Advent calendars. Now, people are like, what's Advent? Well, Advent, it marks the arrival of someone notable. And in our case, as Christians, as Christ followers, that's Jesus. And so his arrival and us celebrating on the 25th means the 4 weeks coming up to the 25th, those are the 4 weeks of Advent, or celebrating the arrival of the Christ child. And so for those days, there's actually the Advent calendar that's been there and actually was established a long time ago. In fact, the first one they note is in 1903. It was by Gerhard Land, and he was from Germany. And what he would do is he would open up a little door for every day of December, coming from Advent all the way to December 25th. And inside would be a scripture verse or a small treat, maybe a candy. But it would be a way to celebrate each day's passing in anticipation for the great reveal on the Christmas day. So that's an amazing thing that's steeped directly in Christian tradition, starting back at the beginning of 1900s. Now, the 12 days of Christmas, that's an interesting thing tied to the calendar, because 12 days of Christmas, we're like, of course, we're T-minus 12 days from the 25th. Well, that's not actually the 12 days they're talking about. Actually, the 12 days of Christmas comes from celebrating from the Christ's birth to the arrival of the Magi or the kings. So it was actually the 12 days in between that and King's Day that they were counting down originally. And so the song that's there about all these gifts coming from a loved one, well, that wasn't naturally the thing either. It actually came out of a French poem and a song that was kind of recited. And if you got it correct, then you would get like a treat. And if you didn't, then you'd kind of have like a forfeit or, a trick played against you. So it's just a fun way of people memorizing something that was complicated. It was actually put into a book and seen published in the Mirth Without Mischief. It's a book from the 1780s. And we later see that it was actually connected and written in its current version to the song that we know today. Some say Mother, some say From a True Love, but somehow you're getting a lot of gifts. If you put it in present day price index, those gifts are astronomical. They would add up to, in current day's pricing, $38,993.59. So that loved one really loves you. Well, let's talk about Christmas trees. Man, what are Christmas trees? Are Christmas trees pagan? Well, what we see is that many people would, in the winter months, use spruce or use Christmas tree style things to celebrate. They would have greenery in their homes throughout winter as a sign of hope and as a sign of the future forecast of having a spring again in a time of desolation. So we see that in the Roman era, even in the ancient Egyptians with other types of greenery. We see it in the Vikings and the Celts. All sorts of different people did this. So it wasn't bizarre that people would use that evergreen type of plant for this reason. But it wasn't the idea of a Christmas tree that comes from that. In fact, a Christmas tree comes actually out of Christian tradition, and it came as a symbol of God's everlasting goodness and his hope for us for the future. And this came primarily out of time, but really took hold during the Protestant era, coming out of Germany. And we see that in its current form for us today, coming out of tying the lighting of the tree or small gifts. They would tie nuts or berries or other things to the tree as treats in a celebration of that time of year about the goodness of God and giving us hope in the midst of darkness. In fact, some attribute Martin Luther as being the first one to put candles on a tree, our modern day, what we would put lights on a tree, because he was walking through the forest, looking up at the stars in the wonder and the brilliance of God's creation. And having the candles on the tree was a reminder of that and the star that was in the nativity. So it's a pretty cool thing that happens there. It didn't really take off here in America for quite a while. Actually, the first idea of it, there was people that were against it for like 100 years. And then it actually started to take off whenever Queen Victoria and her Prince Albert from Germany, they had their own Christmas tree in their home. And it became widely popular where other people started with the tradition as well. And they would take that Christmas tree in, or in civic squares, it began to have Christmas trees that were available. And so people actually started to take off with that idea of putting a Christmas tree in your home and celebrating in that way, looking to the Christmas tree as something that's alive in the midst of winter. So that was a thing that happened for a long time. And it was in the 1740s that they actually became popular here in the States, with the 1840s being the earliest Christmas tree places that were selling Christmas trees for people. So it's been around for quite a long time. As Christmas traditions go on, obviously that looks different place to place. We live in the desert. We don't have snow. We don't have any of those things, but we still like to decorate the place with lights and Christmas trees and other things like that, because they are symbolic of our celebrating the arrival of Christ. When we look at other parts of something that you'd use is a door wreath. And a door wreath is actually directly connected to Christians who would celebrate using that same spruce or that same boughs from a tree, and they would go and they'd make it into a circle because God is eternal. And they would put that on the front of their house as a symbol of believing in God and of hope for the future. And it was even symbolic, the circle, of sometimes the crown of Christ, his crown of thorns upon his head. So even though those things have kind of fallen away and you just see them as Christmas decoration today, originally those were some of the symbolic things that you see within a Christmas wreath. Candy canes. Man, I love candy canes. I love peppermint. I think they're great. Put a candy cane in a hot chocolate, you're winning. Well, what about candy canes? Where do they come from? There is a story that ties back to an interesting thing. It says in 1670, that it actually became something that was happening in Cologne, Germany, in the cathedral. They had a boys' choir that were singing, and the cathedral master, instead of using the switch, he actually would entice the boys with being good by giving them a candy cane if they were good. And this was something that the hard candy sticks that were very popular at the time. And so they actually put the crook on them to be like the shepherd's crook, Now, in later days, you actually see where some say, oh, that's actually a J for Jesus, or the stripes are there because of the stripes of the blood of Christ. And some of that symbolism is true because it is tied to the church. But others, it was a manufacturing choice because of white and red. So for you, as a Christ follower, I hope that you put the meaning back to the Savior of Christmas and not just a confectionery treat. But that's where candy canes come from. Okay, the granddaddy of them all, Saint Nicholas. Santa is a very controversial thing within Christianity because so many people were saying, oh, he's just made Christmas about gifts and about all these things and made it not about Jesus. So they see Santa as like an anti-Jesus character. But it's not really true. It's actually just a story of a Christ follower that got kind of taken out of proportion, then turned into kind of some consumerism. So let's boil it back to St. Nicholas himself. Well, St. Nicholas is actually St. Nicholas of Myra. That's in modern day Turkey. And he was a monk. And he was actually attributed with several different things in his lifetime. One of the most notable was that he would give to the poor when they were in need. Many days you'd see today as one of the symbols of a place like a pawn shop, 3 golden balls that were there. And that's tied back to St. Nicholas, who provided for 3 daughters that were going to have to be sold into slavery because they couldn't pay a dowry to be married. And so instead, he went and provided a dowry for each one of them by putting it in a stocking that was hung outside. And so that's some of the story that's tied to St. Nicholas way back in his day. We're talking about the year 280. So this is early in the life of the church. And so that story was told for over 1,000 years. They would celebrate his life, and the Catholic Church did so. And so they celebrated St. Nicholas, and everywhere the Catholic Church was, they would celebrate someone who was looking out for the poor and giving to the poor in their time of need. In fact, his death on December 6th is something some places still celebrate today. And they tie that back to what is modern day Santa for some people. Now, the retelling of this story, it got popular, especially in the Netherlands and Spain, and in Germany. It took off, each one of them having their own symbolism. For some, he came in a cardinal's outfit because he was a man of the cloth. And in a place that's cold, he had fur trimming, and so that's some of the symbolism you see in the modern day Santa suit with the red and the white fur. Now, him being a fat guy, well, that comes out of America and about people drawing him that way whenever the story kind of jumped across the pond to us. Now, how does St. Nicholas come Santa Claus? Well, his name in Dutch is Sinterklaas. And so as you Americanize that or even Englishize that, it becomes Santa Claus. And so that's where that idea comes from. Now, all the story and the elves and all that stuff's been built since that time. But his original story of being a Christ follower who gave to the poor is amazing. And it's something notable that we should really cherish. It was actually an interesting thing because even though he was born in Lycia and all those days ago, it was actually someone who was teaching theology who wrote a piece that was the most famous that the story jumped off from. It's called A Visit from St. Nicholas, and it's known more famously as The Night Before Christmas. It was actually written by Clement Moore, and he wrote it on the Christmas Eve of 1822. It says that he actually did so having been inspired by his sleigh ride home from where he was teaching. He actually was a professor of the General Theological Seminary in Manhattan. So this is a New York City story. But he pins this story, and it took off and became widely popular about the story of Saint Nick and about Santa Claus and all his giving of gifts to children in need. Now, bonus for you. Did you know that presents and coal are both a good thing? Yeah, this is the bonus. So when you think about it in the story of Santa Claus, he gives presents to the kids that are good and coal to the kids that are bad. Well, coal seems like a punishment to us in modern day, but you have to think about it like this. Coal actually provides warmth for those in need. So even bad kids got some warmth on Christmas. Even though they didn't deserve a treat, they got warmth and taken care of because Santa gives them coal, which keeps them warm for that day. For all of us, however you want to celebrate Christmas, remember, for us as Christ followers, it's about Jesus and his arrival, and we celebrate that, and we share it with all those around. Praying blessings for you wherever you are. Merry Christmas.